October 6, 1879. Carlisle, Pennsylvania. 84 Native American children, aged 6 to 17, arrived at an abandoned military barracks. They were Lakota, Cheyenne, Kiowa. They spoke their languages. They wore their traditional clothes. They had their hair. Pause. Within 24 hours, the boys' long hair was cut. Their clothes were burned. Their names were erased. Richard Henry Pratt, the school's founder, stood before them and declared, after reading Cold Conviction, "A great general has said that the only good Indian is a dead Indian. I agree with the sentiment, but only in this: kill the Indian in him and save the man." Pause for impact. For 39 years, the Carlisle Indian Industrial School operated as a government-sanctioned experiment in cultural genocide. Music swell. Over 10,000 Native children passed through its doors. At least 186 died there, buried in a graveyard thousands of miles from home. Thousands more returned traumatized, unable to speak their own language, rejected by both their tribes and white society. Pause. Heavy. This wasn't education. This was erasure. And Carlisle became the blueprint for 367 similar schools across America and Canada. A system that destroyed generations. This is the story the government tried to bury literally.
To understand Carlisle, you need to understand Richard Henry Pratt. Born 1840, Pratt was a career military officer who fought in the Civil War and later the Indian Wars. In 1875, he was assigned to guard 72 Native prisoners of war, warriors from the Red River War, at Fort Marion, Florida. And that's where Pratt had his epiphany. He believed Native people weren't inherently inferior, they were just uncivilized. Pratt's logic: if you strip away their culture, language, religion, and identity, you can turn them into acceptable Americans. He called it assimilation. We call it cultural genocide. At Fort Marion, Pratt forced prisoners to cut their hair, wear military uniforms, and learn English. He banned their languages, banned their ceremonies, banned even speaking about their tribes. Some prisoners died, others cooperated out of survival. But Pratt saw it as a success. In 1878, he convinced the U.S. government to fund a full-scale boarding school. The target? Native children. The location? Carlisle Barracks, a former cavalry post in Pennsylvania, 1,000 miles from most reservations. Distance was intentional. The farther from home, the harder to escape, the harder to resist.
Transfer the Indian child to an English-speaking community, and he will learn English. Keep him there until he masters it. But Pratt didn't just want them to learn English, he wanted them to forget they were Native. On October 6, 1879, Carlisle opened its doors. The first students weren't volunteers, they were hostages. The first 84 students came from Rosebud and Pine Ridge reservations in South Dakota. Lakota children, sons and daughters of warriors who had fought at Little Bighorn just 3 years earlier. Their parents were told, "Send your children to school or your rations will be cut. No food, no supplies, no choice." The children were loaded onto trains. Many had never seen a train before. They traveled 1,200 miles. Some cried, some were silent, all were terrified. When they arrived at Carlisle, the transformation began immediately. Step 1, the haircut. For Plains tribes, long hair held spiritual and cultural significance. Cutting it was a sign of mourning, of death. Boys were held down, their braids cut off and thrown away. Some wept, some fought, all were powerless.
Step 2. The uniform. Traditional clothing,
beaded dresses, buckskin, stripped away and burned. Boys given military-style uniforms, girls given Victorian dresses, tight, restrictive, foreign. Step 3. The name. Native names were too difficult for white teachers, so children were forced to choose American names from a chalkboard. Spotted Tail became Luther, White Thunder became Charles, Zitkala Shah, Redbird, became Gertrude. One Lakota boy later recalled, "I felt like I was dead. They killed who I was and put someone else in my body." Pause for impact. Step 4. The language. From day one, English only. Speaking native languages, even a single word, meant punishment, beatings, solitary confinement, starvation rations. Pause. Children who arrived fluent in Lakota, Cheyenne, or Kiowa left unable to communicate with their own grandparents. Music, mournful. This wasn't education, this was systematic erasure, and it was just beginning. A day in the life of a Carlisle student. 5 a.m., military-style wake-up call, bugle, immediate inspection. 5:30 a.m., morning prayers, Christian hymns, mandatory. 6 a.m., breakfast, bland institutional food, silence enforced. Pause. 7 a.m. to 12 p.m., half the students attend academic classes, reading, writing, arithmetic, but the curriculum had one goal: erase Native identity.
History lessons taught that Native people were savages who needed to be civilized. Geography lessons ignored Native territories. The other half? Forced labor. Boys learned trades, blacksmithing, carpentry, farming. Girls learned domestic work, cooking, sewing, laundry. But here's the truth. This wasn't job training. It was slave labor. Carlisle saved money by having students build buildings, grow food, and maintain the campus. Pratt called it vocational education. It was exploitation. 12 p.m., lunch. More silence. 1 to 5 p.m., academic and labor groups switch. 6 p.m., dinner. 7 to 9 p.m., supervised recreation, Christian clubs, band practice. No traditional games, no native songs, no ceremonies. 9 p.m., lights out, dormitories locked. Homesickness was epidemic. Children as young as 6, torn from their families, forbidden from their language, punished for their culture, wept themselves to sleep. Letters home were censored, visits were rare or impossible due to distance. Many tried to run away. Those caught? Publicly whipped, shackled, locked in the school's jail cell. Yes, Carlisle had a jail for children. And then there was the outing system. During summers, students were sent to live with white families as unpaid laborers. Pratt called it vocational education. It was indentured servitude. Some families were kind, most were not. Native children worked 12-hour days on farms, in factories, as housemaids. Many faced physical and sexual abuse. When they reported it, they were told they were lying. Carlisle wasn't a school, it was a prison. Between 1879 and 1918, at least 186 Native children died at Carlisle. The real number is likely higher. Records were incomplete, and some bodies were never accounted for. Causes of death. Tuberculosis, the #1 killer, spread rapidly in overcrowded dormitories. Pneumonia, children from warm climates, Arizona, New Mexico, forced into Pennsylvania winters with inadequate clothing. Influenza, the 1918 pandemic hit Carlisle hard. Malnutrition, rations were often insufficient. Accidents, farm equipment, industrial machinery, railway incidents during outings. And then there was suicide. Children who couldn't endure the trauma took their own lives. Pause for impact. When a child died, their body was buried at Carlisle Indian School Cemetery, thousands of miles from home. Parents often weren't notified for weeks or months. Some never learned what happened to their children. In 1892, a Lakota student named Ernest White Thunder died of tuberculosis at age 14. His last words in Lakota to a visiting missionary, "Tell my mother I tried to be brave. Tell her I wanted to come home." He was buried at Carlisle. His mother never saw his body.
In 2017, 125 years later, his remains were finally returned to South Dakota. His family held the funeral he never got. There are still over 180 bodies in that cemetery. Families are still fighting to bring them home. But not every student submitted. Resistance at Carlisle took many forms. Some students secretly spoke their languages in whispers at night. They taught younger children words and songs Pratt tried to erase. Others held clandestine ceremonies, small, hidden rituals to maintain their spiritual connection. Zitkala Shah, or Gertrude Simmons Bonin, a Yankton, Dakota writer, attended Carlisle in the 1880s. She later wrote,
"I felt the cold blades of the scissors against my neck, and I heard them cut through my thick braids. I lost my spirit. I was only one of many broken arrows."
But Zitkala Shah didn't stay broken. She became a powerful activist, author, and musician, using her voice to expose the trauma of boarding schools. Others physically resisted. Luther Standing Bear, a Lakota student, later wrote about fighting back against abusive teachers. "I was not there to become a white man. I was there because I had no choice, but I never forgot who I was." Some students formed secret clubs, protecting each other, sharing food, planning escapes. And escapes happened. Despite punishment, children ran. In 1895, 4 boys escaped Carlisle and walked over 100 miles before being caught.
They were publicly whipped as a warning, but the message was clear. You can cut our hair, you can change our clothes, you can punish us, but you cannot kill who we are. Carlisle's success, measured by white standards, made it a model. By 1902, the U.S. government had opened 25 off-reservation boarding schools modeled on Carlisle. By 1926, 367 schools total, including day schools and reservation-based institutions. Canada adopted the same system, 130 residential schools, operating until 1996. The blueprint was identical. Remove children from families, cut hair, change names, ban native languages and religions, force Christianity, forced labor disguised as education, punishment for cultural expression. Over 100,000 native children in the U.S. passed through these schools. In Canada, 150,000. The death toll, thousands. Mass graves are still being discovered. In 2021, ground-penetrating radar found 215 unmarked graves at Kamloops Indian Residential School in Canada, then 751 graves at Marival, then hundreds more at other sites. In the U.S., investigations are just beginning. How many children died? How many are buried in unmarked graves? We still don't know, because the government didn't keep records, or destroyed them, or never cared enough to count. In 1918, Carlisle Indian Industrial School closed, not because of public outcry, not because of native resistance, because World War I needed the building for a military hospital. Richard Henry Pratt had retired in 1904, celebrated as an education pioneer. He died in 1924, honored with military accolades. He never faced justice. But Carlisle's closure didn't end the system. Other boarding schools continued into the 1960s and 70s. The last federally funded off-reservation school, Intermountain in Utah, closed in 1984. That's not ancient history. That's 40 years ago. The trauma didn't end with the schools. Intergenerational trauma, PTSD, passed from survivors to their children and grandchildren. Survivors couldn't speak their languages, so they couldn't teach them. They had been taught that their culture was shameful, so they hid it. They had been abused, so they struggled to parent without repeating cycles of violence, addiction, suicide, poverty, domestic violence. These aren't native problems. These are boarding school legacies. In 2021, U.S. Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland, a Laguna Pueblo woman and boarding school descendant, launched a federal Indian boarding school initiative. The goal: identify schools, locate graves, document abuses, support survivors. It's a start. But there's been no reparations, no criminal prosecutions, and only 181 native languages remain. Half are spoken by fewer than 10 people. Carlisle's mission, kill the Indian, almost succeeded. Let's hear from the survivors. Zitkala Shah, 1876 to 1938, Carlisle student, later wrote, "The noise and chaos of the school, the ringing of bells, the marching, the English commands I didn't understand. It was like being swallowed by a monster. I mourned for myself as if I had died." Luther Standing Bear, 1868 to 1939, one of Carlisle's first students. "I am a Lakota. I will die a Lakota. Carlisle tried to make me into a white man, and it failed. But it stole years of my life, and I will never forgive that." Andrew Blackbird, Odawa student, 1890s. "They beat me for speaking my language. They beat me for crying. They beat me for praying to my grandfather's spirits. What they did to us, there's no word for it in English, but in my language, there is genocide." Modern survivor, Ramona Klein, Northern Arapaho, attended a boarding school in the 1950s. "I was 7 years old when they took me. I didn't see my mother for 2 years. When I came home, I couldn't speak to her. I had forgotten our language. She cried. I cried. That school stole my childhood and my mother tongue. I'm 73 now, and I'm still learning my language back. They tried to kill the Indian in me. They failed, but they hurt me so badly." These aren't isolated stories. These are 100,000 stories, and many will never be told because the survivors didn't survive. So why does Carlisle matter today? Lesson 1. Cultural genocide is real, and it happened on American soil. The UN defines genocide as acts intended to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. Boarding schools fit that definition. Lesson 2. Assimilation is violence. Kill the Indian, save the man wasn't a metaphor, it was policy, and it nearly worked. Lesson 3. Trauma doesn't end with the victim. Boarding school survivors raise children who never learned their culture. Those children raise children who grew up disconnected from their heritage. Intergenerational trauma is still shaping Native communities today. Lesson 4. The past isn't past. The last boarding school closed in 1984. Mass graves are being discovered right now. Survivors are still alive and still fighting for justice. Lesson 5. Language is survival. There are 181 native languages left in the U.S. Over 100 are critically endangered, but tribes are fighting back. Immersion schools, language apps, elder recordings. Carlisle tried to kill the languages, but they're not dead yet. Modern parallels, border family separations, same tactic, different target. Immigrant children in detention, same trauma, different era. Cultural erasure, ongoing everywhere. Carlisle isn't ancient history. It's a warning and a call to action. October 6th, 1879 to September 1st, 1918. 39 years, 10,000 plus children, 186 plus dead, countless more scarred for life. Carlisle Indian Industrial School is now the U.S. Army War College. The cemetery remains a small, quiet plot behind a fence. Visitors are rare. Music, reflective, rising. But the descendants remember. In 2016, the Northern Arapaho tribe successfully repatriated the remains of 3 children. In 2017, Lakota families brought Ernest White Thunder home, 125 years late. The fight continues for the others, because these weren't just students. They were sons, daughters, grandchildren. They were Lakota, Cheyenne, Kiowa, Apache, Navajo, Hopi. They had names, real names, not the ones forced upon them. White Thunder, Spotted Tail, Little Plume, Ernest Knocksoff, Amos Laframboise, Nancy DeCory, Sophia Titoff, Hugh Chi, Edward Upright. And they had dreams. Dreams stolen by a government that called it education. But here's what Carlisle didn't destroy: resilience. Today, over 574 federally recognized tribes thrive in the U.S. native languages are being reclaimed. Ceremonies are being revived. Stories are being told. Music, hopeful, strong. The Indian wasn't killed. We're still here. So remember Carlisle. Remember what was done. Remember the 186 plus buried there. Remember the 10,000 plus who survived. And remember this: silence is complicity. Forgetting is a second genocide. Share this story. Teach this history. Support native language revitalization. Demand accountability. And never let them erase us again. End screen. Subscribe CTA Plus. Remember Carlisle, 1879 to 1918. Links to National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition.